Thank you very much for everyone, especially the organizers, for this very precious invitation to be with you here. I'm very happy to learn from comments and questions after my talk. The limits of causality. In current research on causality, there are various trends. The main ones are probably the trend that links causality strictly to empirical science, and the other one, the trend that explores how causality ranges all the way from science to everyday linguistic behavior and practice. So I will call just for a very quick overview, I will call the first group research in the area of causality for the natural sciences. And typical authors are well known, like Mackey, The Cement of the Universe, David Lewis, Causation, for instance, and relatively recent work by Judea Pearl, Causality, Models, Reasoning and Inference. These kinds of studies are, in fact, I would call them philosophical investigations that are intended to help the scientific enterprise. The other trend is concerned with broader issues, and some examples here. The foundational article by Elizabeth Hanscom, Causality and Determination, Nancy Cartwright, Hunting Causes and Using Them. She works in the area of economics, and also a recent work by Manfred and Andrew. These people usually adopt a certain kind of dispositionalism in philosophy in general, and they also adopt a position which is recently referred to by the term causal pluralism. Causal pluralism is an ongoing research project, and I think I find it very interesting and plausible, very significant, because the conceptual content of causality is not exhausted by what happens in the sciences. In what follows, my talk, I will be situating the discussion within this latter approach. That means I will be closer to Anscombe, Cartwright, and Manfred, and others like them. I will be examining how causality is linked to everyday contexts of explanation, and how the idea of limit, referring also to everyday situations, is applicable to causality, the idea of limit. Let me also mention some of my very basic assumptions. Like Ludwig Wittgenstein, I am convinced that concepts have habitats. Concepts have certain places or contexts where these concepts live properly. There are prototypical situations where the concept obtains its primordial meaning, on which various nuances are constructed later. To explore the limits of a concept, what do? To explore the limits of a concept, we stretch the concept away from its normal habitat to see whether it breaks down, and if it does, where. I am convinced that this operation helps us gain clarity and discover a wider world. Of course, for the idea of a limit to be applicable, we need some variables. Variables that can be increased to some maximum or to infinity. This is, of course, a very simple operation in mathematics. As regards causality, can we do the same operation? Of course, we need. In fact, I am opting to consider two possible ways of studying conceptual effects in the sense of a limit. One kind of limit. C causes E, okay? The cause causes the effect. C causes E, where E is a specific event or state of affairs. And then we let E tend to a maximum and explore the causal relation when E becomes The maximum, that means the entire universe, the fullest effect possible. That's one way of studying a limit. Another way that I will explore with you is grades of causality. C causes E partially or fully, in the sense of C shifting from being a partial explanation of E to being a full explanation of E. We will see that the exploration of the limits of causality in this sense will resonate with various debates typical of natural theology and with issues discussed and quantified in empirical cosmology. Of course, I fully respect the advances that people have made in these areas, and I do not intend to discredit in any way their scientific achievements. I think, however, that we can make a modest contribution by adopting a method that is definitely philosophical, a method that is essentially related to conceptual analysis. My hope is that through my use of current conceptual, logical, and analytic tools, the results of this investigation will deliver some new insights useful both for natural theology and empirical cosmology. Let me add, however, that even in this strictly philosophical approach that I am adopting, I am presenting my proposal as just one possible road to take. There may be others. So let's start with the first kind of limit, maximizing the effect. First way to explore, then, is to let E tend to a maximum. The maximum we usually refer to by the term the universe. Is, however, talking about the universe logically consistent? There may be problems inherent within the very idea of the universe. Now, much useful empirical work has been done, especially during the 20th century, regarding this question. What follows is not related directly to empirically testable theories. As indicated before, my inquiry here will be conceptual in nature. It seeks to uncover some of the conceptual rules that govern the correct use of the word universe. My inquiry is meant to be a complement, not a substitute, for empirical work in this area. Let us start with the most straightforward plane. What is the universe? The universe is the totality of all things. This is the everyday understanding of the word, supported in somewhat roundabout way by the history of the word, the etymology. The Latin unus means one, versum, to turn, and the combination universus suggests the idea of a multiplicity turned into one, or combined into one whole. Is this everyday understanding acceptable philosophically? Before launching our investigation, we need to analyze it further to make sure that we have a plausible starting point. First source of worry, problem of meaning, the very meaning and conceivability of the word universe. Can we conceive of this? We spontaneously take the universe to be conceivable, somewhat like any other object. But there may be a problem. Another problem I will call a problem of possible grammatical confusion. Let's take one problem after the other. Problem of meaning. We spontaneously take the universe to be conceivable, like any other object. Now, how do you conceive objects? We are acquainted with objects that are detached from us in some way, and that we can perceive from a distance. We assume that we can picture astronomical entities in the same way. Hence, we engage in a kind of counterfactual imagination. We say, this is a diagram of the solar system. And we would see it this way had we been situated at a distance. We see the picture of a solar system as if we were outside of the solar system, seeing it from far away. We see the same thing when we say the same thing when dealing with larger and larger astronomical entities. This is a diagram of the galaxies, as we would see it had we been situated at a distance. This method forms a kind of sequence that leads us to imagine the entire universe as an entity perceivable from a point outside it. At this limit, however, the counterfactual situation becomes counter-logical, or in other words, self-contradictory. The universe, being the totality of all things, has, by definition, nothing outside it, and nothing to be contrasted with. There is no background against which the idea can stand out. We cannot say the universe is this as opposed to that as a kind of background. This is, of course, a limit situation, and it obliges us to say that there is no entity that the word universe can refer to. Philosopher Bertrand Russell explained this point in the following way. He claimed that the word universe is handy. It's a handy word in some connections, but I don't think it stands for anything that has a meaning. That it does not necessarily mean anything. By this he meant that it lacks a referent. It lacks a referent even though it plays a role within the grammar of language. It is merely a non-referring term in language, like the word the article the, or if. So that's one source of worry. Consider another source of worry, which I'm calling grammatical ambiguity. The grammar of the word universe might suggest that it is a count noun. A noun in grammar that it allows us to count. Like, let's have another simple example, book. The implication is that just as we consider an individual book one of a kind, and can thus count a number of books, 1 book, 2 books, 3 books, we can also do the same with the universe. We assume in the very use of the word that the universe is one of a kind, and that we can count universes. This claim, however, may be just an instance of conceptual confusion, resulting from superficial grammatical structures of language. For all we know, the word universe could be a non-count noun. There are nouns that are non-count nouns, like water. Water is a non-count noun. If this were the case, the use of the indefinite article would be inappropriate. Just as we cannot say a water, so also on this view we cannot say a universe. And just as we say the water only in the sense of an instance or a sample of water, as in the expression the water in this jug, so also we may say the universe only in the sense of an instance of universe, an instance of reality. If we take this line, universe, the word universe, will be seen to be very similar to the word reality or nature, when these terms are used as non-count nouns. Now, I'm just exploring these subtle conceptual problems that may arise. They do not, of course, paralyze in any serious way our extended use of talking about the universe, speculating about the universe, and even testing theories about the universe. So let's consider some answers to these problems. We are successful in using the word universe, and this indicates that these problems are not genuine, they're not deep. So let us take a second look. It is easy to realize that the first problem, the problem of meaning, brings up the useful insight that the way of conceiving of something always involves a point of view. The argument, however, contains a flaw caused with the presumed theory of meaning. Bertrand Russell's point only makes sense within the context of a strict referential theory of meaning, according to which a word has meaning if and only if it refers to something, some object. Many philosophers, as you may know, since Russell, have offered convincing arguments showing that such a theory of meaning is seriously restrictive. Even if a word cannot be associated directly with an object, it can still have meaning. Moreover, words that do not refer to objects can have a meaning that is more crucial in a given context than words that do refer. The conclusion to draw from this is clear. The fact that it's not easy to give the identity conditions of the universe as one object does not imply that the word universe is deficient or meaningless. Let's consider the other problem now. The second source of worry was conceptual or grammatical confusion. But again, I don't think it causes any serious objection. If the word universe should be seen as a non-count noun, nothing drastic follows. The main consequence of this objection is that it raises serious doubts on whether, given the constraints that arise from conceptual considerations, we can legitimately count universes. This point relates to the much discussed conjecture that there are multiple universes, a conjecture that deserves some more attention. So let's consider this point number 2 a bit in some more detail. We start with the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. This interpretation holds that every time a quantum event, a quantum experiment with different possible results is performed, all the outcomes are realized, all of them, each in a different universe. We are aware of only one universe, but in fact there is a constant ramification of reality into different universes, each having equal ontological status. This is the kind of conjecture that these people propose. All alternative histories, therefore, and all alternative futures constitute parallel universes that are just as real as the universe that we are aware of. This hypothesis, this proposal, raises a number of serious problems. Some of these problems are scientific, others conceptual. Let us consider the two main conceptual problems. First of all, if all parallel universes enjoy the same ontological status, I do not have to worry about dying in one of them, if I know that I will be alive in some other universe. So, if a simple quantum experiment, such as the clicking of a Geiger counter detecting nuclear radiation, is what determines whether I will be alive or dead in the near future, I should not worry about this. There will always be a world in which I will still be alive. People who are familiar with quantum mechanics, of course, will recognize the problem. This scenario is obviously problematic because we are involved personally. It is effectively showing that accepting the many words interpretation impinges seriously, very seriously, on the way we understand rational decision-making and everyday responsible living. It seems to lead to irrationality. Accepting the hypothesis at one end, therefore, of multiple universes in this sense, destabilizes our conceptual scheme at another end. It destabilizes the end that deals with decision-making and morals and eventually results in the conceptual scheme's total breakdown. The second conceptual problem with the idea of multiple universes arises because of the possibility of placing all of these multiple universes into one set. If there is indeed a multiplicity of universes, we will still need to face the issue of how to refer to the totality that includes all of them. Just as having different entities, even very large astronomical bodies, does not stop us from having a concept of the universe, a concept that refers to the totality that includes all such entities. So also when having different parallel universes. In that case, we will still need a term, a word, that refers to the totality, a totality of which each parallel universe will be a part. We need to resort to some word to indicate the conjunction of all universes. We have, in fact, used the word totality. We cannot avoid this. Moreover, the term totality has here the exact role of the term universe. what universe was meant to have before it started getting mishandled by protagonists of the hypothesis involving multiple universes. What effectively happens is that after allowing the use of the term universes in the plural, we end up needing to invent another term to refer to all the universes considered together, which in current popular literature is in fact the word multiverse. Clearly, this linguistic somersault will land us at the same spot from which we started. Perhaps there will be people who propose multiple multiverses, and the whole thing will reiterate. It makes more sense to stick to the original meaning of the word universe and to designate its various parts by appropriate adjectives. We can explore, of course, also the possibility of having many universes not in parallel to one another, but in a sequence, each universe dying away in the very act of giving birth to the next one. On this view, the many universes exist one after the other, forming a kind of chain. Some of these universes would have the right conditions to support life, others won't. We live in one particular universe because it happens to have the right conditions for intelligent life to evolve. Universes that do not satisfy these conditions do not contain anyone capable of learning about and appreciating them. Note that on this version of multiple universes, the flow of time is assumed as a common background behind the rise and fall of the various universes. This background is a conceptual requirement couched within the very idea of having one universe existing before or after the other. Does this option fare any better than the previous version where universes were considered parallel to one another? The answer is no. For the sake of linguistic correctness, and hence for correct reasoning, we should reserve the term universe to refer to the totality of all these universes, to refer to the entire chain. In this view, in fact, if this view of a chain of universes turns out to be defensible on empirical grounds, the correct way of talking about the situation would be to admit that what used to be thought to be the entire universe has turned out to be just one link in a long chain. The term universe, however, should even in that case be reserved to the totality. The correct way of talking about the birth and death of universes would be, in that case, in terms of various stages of the one universe. These various possibilities that I have just explored indicate that there is something logically undesirable with the idea of multiple universes. The common idea, therefore, of the universe being one, understood as the totality of all things, gains support. It gains even more support from another angle. Some philosophers have argued that in the order of understanding, the universe has to be one by logical necessity. In other words, it must be one because the intellect is one. For instance, let's consider Immanuel Kant's idea of the universe as a unity, in the sense as one of the conditions for possibility of rationality. Let's read this section from the Critique of Pure Reason. By an architectonic, I understand the art of constructing systems. A systematic unity is what first raises ordinary knowledge to the rank of science. That is, makes a system out of a mere aggregate of knowledge. So is the architectonic, the doctrine of the scientific in our knowledge, and therefore necessarily forms part of the doctrine of method, in accordance with reasons, legislative prescriptions. Our diverse modes of knowledge must not be permitted to be a mere rhapsody, this is the word he uses, but must form a system. Only so can they further the essential ends of reason. So, understanding requires not only the avoidance of self-contradiction, but also the unity of order. By assuming that the universe is understandable, we are in fact assuming that the universe is accessible to us only via some regular, systematic relationship between its parts. a relationship expressed very often in terms of a complex nexus of causal links. This position reflects the idea prevalent since ancient philosophy that the universe should be described as cosmos rather than chaos. The main point here is that the very idea of understandability carries within it the idea of unity in the terms of Kant's system. The basic insight here is that the correct use of the word universe manifests a conceptual truth, a rule that needs to be in place before any empirical observation, and that this conceptual truth includes unity. So this is a kind of little summary of my point here. No separation between the parts of the universe should be considered drastic enough to justify the claim that there are in fact two separate universes. You may talk about two separate parts of the universe, that's fine. Up to now we have been exploring the challenges that arise when we let the second relatum of the causal relation, in other words the effect, tend to a maximum, E tending to a maximum, remember. We have not considered the cause yet. The results of our investigation up to now show that this kind of limit, this kind of maximizing, which concerns the effect, leads neither to a contradiction nor to a plurality, but rather to a unity, which we indicate by the word universe. Now we move on to the second kind of limit, the one concerning grades of causality, maximizing the grade of causality. The idea of grades of causality involves taking cause, the word cause, in the original sense. What was the original sense we find in ancient Greek texts? The original sense of cause meaning something similar to an explanation. The basic hypothesis is that for any specific phenomenon, and I'm not talking about the entire universe only, any phenomenon, we can legitimately talk about grades of causality in the sense of the degree of explanation. The degree of explanation available for that specific phenomenon. In other words, we need to explore the idea of explaining something partially or fully. The limit occurs in the following way. We explore the limit as we move from explaining something to some extent, to a greater extent, to an even greater extent, and so on, until we could say that we explain it fully. The basic idea is not difficult to conceive. Let me give you a simple example. Consider the case of a professor. Many of us here are professors and know exactly what I mean. Professor wanting to know how much of a student's essay was really the outcome of that student's own effort. The essay is a case of production of efficient causality. There are various possible answers to the professor's concern. At one end of the spectrum, we have the case of flagrant plagiarism. The student plagiarized his essay entirely. He downloaded it entirely from the internet. In this case, we cannot say that the student was the cause of the essay. He does not deserve a mark because he was not the cause. If, let's say, we want to assign a number to the student's own efforts related to how much of his causing was involved, we could say that the grade of causality here is 0. The next step would be when the student submits an essay made up of like a collage. You know what I mean? A collage of plagiarized bits and pieces. Here he may be granted some merit, perhaps, I don't know how you feel about this, at least for joining up the plagiarized bits into some kind of unified whole. The grade of causality here is somewhat higher than 0. We could consider other scenarios, going up the ladder of grades of causality by considering the case when the student uses some ideas proposed by others but expresses them in his own words. And finally, the case where the essay is fully original, his own work. In this last case, we could talk of the highest grade of causality. I am convinced that the kind of graded causality represented by this example is perfectly valid. It is not in any way marginal or incorrect. It is a way of using the concept correctly, the concept of causality. We need to explore now how this simple model of graded causality could be applicable to material objects and states of affairs. Before we proceed, however, we can consider a possible objection here. Even though the student's essay example seems plausible, other simple examples of causality do not seem to allow for grades. For instance, some other examples. We say that the throwing of the stone caused the smashing of the window pane. Okay, you throw a stone, smash the window pane. In this case, the cause apparently delivers the entire effect. It would be strange to insist that the cause, the throwing of the stone, was somewhat limited because it did not cause, say, the existence of the window pane, or the window pane's weight per square centimeter, or any other feature of the window pane. It would be incorrect to say that the throwing of the stone as a cause was somewhat deficient, because it did not cause all these other features, but only the smashing. These considerations suggest that causality within the statement C causes E is always entire. The description of C and D is so determined precisely to ensure this. This is the objection. Of course, there are cases of partial causality, but these are always cases of joint causality. For instance, the rainbow. The rainbow is caused by the combination of rain and sunlight. We could say that the sunlight caused the rainbow, but that this causality was partial, not only the sunlight. Without the rain, the rainbow would not have occurred. The rain likewise is a partial cause. In such cases, we could perhaps resort to the idea of graded causality in this restricted sense. Notice, however, that the description of the cause and the effect makes a difference. We could, for instance, have referred to the combined effect, the combined event, the rain together with the sunlight, that combined original event. And this combination, we call it the cause. And this composite event would then have full causality with respect to the effect, the rainbow. The partial nature of causality, therefore, seems to be a matter of convention. Convention as regards description. That's the objection. To respond to this objection, we need to consider how the argument is, in fact, reducing the complexity of the situation to a minimum. Like we have often in empirical work, the situation deals with ideal cases. It deals with ideal cases where of the many variables involved, only few are considered. There are, however, many other conditions that have to be satisfied for the effect to occur, even when the quoted cause occurs. We go back to the example of throwing the stone. The throwing of the stone indeed causes the smashing of the window pane, but only when the throwing of the stone occurs when the glass is of a certain fragility, when the stone is over a certain weight, when the throw is above a certain force, and when many other conditions are satisfied. Seen from this perspective, the causality attributed to the throwing of the stone does not appear to be as entire, as full, as it appeared before. Admittedly, the idea of graded causality is present here not as in the student's essay example, but in a different way. Here we have causality in the sense of explanation. Causality has grades. We need to be always aware of many other conditions. Causality has grades because the event we call the cause is just one element of a large set of conditions. And to be able to claim that the effect is fully explained, we need to know the entire set. The overall point, therefore, should be formulated as follows. The idea of graded causality is defensible. I am convinced it is defensible, insofar as causality is considered in the broad sense of explanation. I move on to my last section now, and this is, of course, the high point of my investigation. the full cause of the full effect, if you like. We maximize into dimensions the full cause of the universe. We are now in a position to deal with this question, the cause of the universe. Our aim is to explore the extent to which it is possible to talk about the full cause of the entire universe. In this way, we are using the idea of limits on two fronts. I'm sure you are aware of this now. The limit as the explanandum goes to its maximum, together with the limit as the explanation goes from partial to full. Of course, philosophical inquiry about the cause of the universe is not something new. The line we are following here, because of its emphasis on full or partial explanation, corresponds more or less to what in philosophy of religion is called the Contingency Argument for the existence of God, which was explored carefully by major thinkers like Aquinas and Leibniz and others. I will first present the main argument, which involves the idea of contingency, and then briefly deal with two possible objections. Contingency, what is it? In logic, contingency is an attribute of propositions. A proposition can be true in all possible worlds. In this case, we say that the proposition is necessary. If it is not necessary, then it is contingent. We can draw this distinction between propositions by using the idea of explanation. A contingent proposition needs further explanation. A necessary proposition is one that needs no further explanation. It is self-explanatory. So a contingent proposition is one that is explainable with reference to other information, other facts, beyond what it contains. Contingent propositions describe states of affairs that could have been different from what they actually are. For example, you have a leaf. It falls from the branch of the tree. If a leaf falls off the branch and lands 2 meters away from the trunk of the tree, the proposition describing it is contingent, because the leaf could have landed not 2 meters away, but only 1 meter away. What determines the truth as regards the final position of the leaf involves many variables, of course. It depends on the leaf's shape, the wind direction, the ground's features, and so on. The final position of the leaf with respect to the tree could have been different. This is what makes this particular state of affairs not self-explanatory. To explain it, to determine what causality is involved, we need to refer to prior circumstances or to wider circumstances. Up to now, there has been nothing special in this discussion, of course. Necessity, contingency. The crucial move comes when we try to apply these distinctions to the case of the entire universe. The universe we consider as the conjunction of all things that exist, all that existed, all that will exist, the maximal fact, if you like. That all these things existed, and will exist, considered a fact. Is this comprehensible maximal fact necessary or contingent? We are here exploring the limits of explanation, and therefore the limits of causality. The way to proceed is to recall that the universe as a whole certainly includes some contingent facts. For instance, the actual universe is the one in which the leaf, in my previous example, has fallen 2 meters away from the trunk. This actual universe, however, could have been different. It could have been a universe in which the leaf falls only 1 meter away from the trunk. Now, the universe as a whole, therefore, is contingent. In other words, it is not self-explanatory. It needs an explanation. This explanation needs to be a necessary one so as to close the chain of contingent explanations. If there were no such self-explanatory fact or ultimate cause, what happens? The universe as a whole would remain ultimately unintelligible. It could be locally intelligible in the sense of having partial explanations available, but it would be ultimately unintelligible. Causality could cover local facts, such as the falling of the leaf. It could cover more general facts, like the laws on which these local causal explanations depend. It could, however, never be complete. If there were no ultimate cause, if there were no self-explanatory cause of the whole universe, the completeness of our explanation would be pushed further and further back without hope of resolution. We need the explanatory chain to be hanging, as it were, from some stable support, from a necessary ultimate cause. Otherwise, the incompleteness in our intelligibility would trickle down the chain. It would infest with incompleteness all explanations, even local ones. It renders incomplete even the explanation of the leaf falling here rather than there. To ensure the full intelligibility of the universe, therefore, we must have a necessary fact that explains the universe. That's a bold statement. Certainly, we can expect objections, and let's consider at least two of them. First possible objection. Does this argument commit the fallacy of composition? This fallacy occurs when we start from the fact that every part of a whole has a certain property, and then infer that the whole has that property as well. And sometimes there is a fallacy there. We say that every brick in the wall weighs less than 10 kilograms. And then deduce that the wall itself, therefore, weighs less than 10 kilograms. This is obviously a fallacy, no? The argument I presented above could suffer from the same problem. An opponent could argue that if one or every part of the universe is contingent, it does not necessarily follow that the universe as a whole is contingent. So, how can we respond to this? The fallacy is helpful. It warns us against assuming that the inference from a whole, from part to whole, is always correct. It's not always correct, no. It does. The fallacy, however, the argument, the objection, does not say that it is never correct. In fact, we can distinguish the properties of parts that are properties of the whole and properties of parts that are not properties of the whole. For instance, we consider the weight of the bricks in the wall, no? The weight of each brick is obviously a property that does not apply to the whole wall, but the property is underwater. Consider that as another example, no? That property does pass on to the whole. In this case, it is not a fallacy to infer that the fact that each brick is underwater means that the whole wall is underwater. So the fallacy of composition occurs with some properties, but not with all properties. Moreover, there are other kinds of properties that pass on to the whole, even if not all the parts have them. Consider, for instance, another property, another example. The property contains radioactive material. If some bricks contain radioactive material, the entire wall contains nuclear material. So, the argument I presented above is not inferring a property of the whole from property that is possessed by all of the parts. It is inferring a property of the whole from a property of some of its parts. It is saying that the universe is contingent because some of its parts are contingent. Therefore, condemning this reasoning as a fallacy of composition, we need to examine carefully the nature of this particular property. The main question becomes, is being contingent like the property less than 10 kilograms in weight, or like being underwater, or like the property containing nuclear material? Clearly, all that the contingency argument needs is that being contingent is like the latter, containing nuclear material. And it is not difficult to see that this is indeed the case. Contingency, what kind of property is it? It's like contains nuclear material. Contingency in one part infests, as it were, the entire modal space available. This feature is similar to what we said. It's like the case of a chain. If one ring is weak, even if all the other rings are strong, the entire chain will be weak. The weakness present in one of the rings infests, as it were, the entire chain. If one part is contingent, the whole universe is contingent, even if all the other parts are necessary. In other words, necessity and contingency are not balanced opposites. Let's consider another possible objection. If we accept the ultimate explanation, could we ask, what is the cause of the limit cause? The assumption that the causal sequence is in some sense convergent, that the limit exists, seems inherently unstable. It reminds us of the well-known question in children's religion classes, no, who made God? David Hume deals with these questions in his dialogues concerning natural religion, and he highlights the question of degrees of analogy. If we take God, the creator, as analogous to humans, God must then have a cause just as humans do. If instead of God we have ultimate cause, the same reasoning, of course, generates the same kind of question. We assume tacitly that the ultimate cause is similar to other causes, and thereby conclude that if the occurrence of causes allows for an inquiry into their causes, so also the ultimate cause. All causes have causes. The ultimate cause must have one as well. Of course, the problem here is the degree of similarity that we assume between the limit cause and those normal concepts that we use to point towards the limit concept. How similar is God to human beings? How similar is the ultimate cause to normal causes? Since in these considerations we are dealing with limit concepts, the answer to these questions such questions is not straightforward. Let's consider some examples. And we start with Spinoza. He has an interesting approach to this area. In his Ethics, he first argues that God is the absolutely infinite being, that God exists. The universe is not therefore a production of God that lies outside of God, for Spinoza. It is rather the necessary development of God. That's the universe. To articulate this point, Spinoza assumes that the concept of God is continuous with that of nature. Natura naturans and natura naturata are like two sides of the same coin. And what is the coin? Necessity. Let's have a look. In nature there is nothing contingent, but all things are determined from the necessity of the divine nature to exist and act in a certain manner. By joining these two concepts, Deus and natura, Spinoza is therefore stipulating that the question, what is the cause of the laws of nature, and the question, what is the cause of the universe, have no meaning. They are explanation stoppers. Everything is in God and God is necessary. According to Spinoza, what I am seeking in this paper, through the analysis of the limits of causality, in other words, the full explanation of the totality, is available at the level of the laws of nature, together with the necessity that they involve. Aquinas had argued differently. Aquinas argued that there is a fundamental distinction between creating substance and created substance. Deus is not the same as natura. Deus is not continuous with natura. Deus is incommensurably different. For Aquinas, it makes perfectly good sense to ask, what is the cause of the order of the universe, or the laws of the universe? God is the one who created all the constituents of the universe, with all their individual and generic dispositions, and all the laws that are discernible within the universe, including the contingency that we find therein. For Aquinas, God is like the student in my example above, the student who produced the research paper in its entirety. God is distinct from creation and is also the one who created all of it, laws and all, with both necessity and contingency. Let's have a look at this part in the Summa. It pertains to divine providence to produce every grade of being, and thus it has prepared for some things necessary causes, so that they happen of necessity, for other things contingent causes, that they may happen by contingency, according to the nature of the proximate causes. He's kind of an open house, necessity and contingency, no problem. Aquinas is articulating the fullest kind of causality, what I call the highest grade of causality. In arguing this way, Aquinas is avoiding the element of necessity that we find in Spinoza and earlier thinkers like Plotinus. This seems a good move. We could say perfectly in line with the biblical picture. To do this, however, Aquinas has to pay a price. He needs to explain how God as creator could be conceivable outside the universe, which by definition contains all there is. To achieve this, Aquinas has no other way than to resort to the idea that the causality of creation is unlike any other form of causality. Creation is not a kind of production, but a relation of ontological dependence. Notice how this feature of Aquinas refers back to Plato's views on causality, especially Plato's rejection of causality in terms of material mechanisms and Plato's recourse to participation. Obviously, my argument in this paper has drawn me closer to Aquinas than to Spinoza. I would like to add, however, that although the ultimate cause involved in creation is distinct from all other causes, we can still use these other causes as a ladder to arrive at some knowledge of the limit. Can a limit be radically different from the members of the sequence that lead up to it? The answer is yes. We have some examples. Consider this example. The regular polygons inscribed within a circle. The limit as the number of sides increases. Okay? What is the limit? Is the circumference of the circle. But the circumference is a curve, while the sides of the polygons are always straight lines, all the way. Polygon is a polygon, even if it has many sides. The limit is thus essentially different from the sequence that leads up to it. This example was mentioned by John Henry Newman. There is a way, therefore, of avoiding the infinite regress of causes. We can resort to the idea that although the ultimate cause is a limit of caused causes, it is essentially different. All causers have causes, while the ultimate cause has none. All explanations are partial, some with a low grade of causality, others with a high grade of causality. The ultimate explanation, however, is full. Conclusion. The original aim of this paper was to judge the utility of studying the limits of causality. I explored the limits in two dimensions, as I explained, maximizing the effect, maximizing the explanatory depth. As we saw, such an investigation touches upon some issues in current empirical cosmology, if you like, and revisits some classic arguments regarding philosophy of religion and the Platonic notion of participation. Many other arguments can be brought in, of course, and some of those we discussed need further clarification. Overall, however, the results indicate that the use of current conceptual, logical, and analytic tools can deliver some new, interesting insights. We can express the basic question in this way. Now, does the stretching of the concept of causality to its limits lead to a logical contradiction? If my reasoning is correct, the answer is no. Thank you for your attention.